The next thing the Tibetan talks about is he's talking about higher and lower principles, and in talking about this, he talks about the higher difference between the higher and lower mind. Anyone here know what the difference is between the higher and lower mind?
Well, the higher mind is where you're connecting to your
Oh,
intuition.
Curtis, good to see you.
Yeah.
Hey, you got a video. When did it happen?
Yeah, how you doing? Well, you have your higher abstract mind connected to your soul and your intuitive mind, and then your lower concrete mind, which is kind of like the drawing board where your plans are drawn, and you see intelligently how you'd like to create from what the information or manifest the information that you receive from your higher mind. So your lower mind is what makes your higher mind a reality in the real world. It's more concrete, more thinking, more in tune with the world around you. So
Yeah.
For the concrete, the higher mind is more connecting to the spirit and through your channel, through your soul.
Okay, that's real good, Curtis.
Isn't the lower mind also ruled by emotions, JJ?
The lower mind, not so much ruled by them, but connected to the emotions.
Connected to, yeah, probably a better way to say that, yeah.
And sometimes the lower mind overrides the emotions, but the lower mind and the emotions are very interconnected, and being ruled by either one too much is not a good thing. The goal is to be ruled by the higher mind.
Right.
Okay. Now, any other...
Well, the lower mind is
on the difference between the higher and lower mind?
the lower mind is called the man in the brain, and the higher mind is the soul, the what's called higher manas.
Yeah. Okay. And can somebody give me an example of the lower mind at work?
I was going to say something else, but the lower mind at work, you know, formulating things, like you kind of said in the Immortal, putting two and two together. You know, well, if this person thinks this and they also think that, those things are contradictory, so they haven't really examined that, you know.
When it says the mind is a slayer of the real, you think that's referring to the lower mind or higher mind?
Well, the lower mind.
Lower mind.
But potentially the higher mind, maybe, at certain rare instances. Who knows?
Yeah. Okay, so how is the lower mind the slayer of the real?
We begin to believe the appearances and not see the causes of and the significance of what's going on.
Okay. For instance, let's look at these scientists that like Neil deGrasse Tyson, smart man and everything, but he doesn't really believe in God. Carl Sagan, another brilliant man, he didn't believe in God either. But focusing on the lower mind, they just can't prove that there's a God, so they don't accept it.
Well, the God that's been taught in Sunday school doesn't exist. It's too much anthropomorphized.
Right, but we're not talking about that. We're talking about the higher creative life that has created all things. And so there's a higher intelligence that does definitely exist that science is overlooked. And they also can't see the fact that there's life after death, even though all kinds of people have had near-death experiences. They just explain it away using not the higher mind, but the lower mind. So they explain all these supernatural things away that give evidence that there's more to life than just the physical reality. We're more than just an advanced machine. So what they see in human beings is just an advanced machine that somehow has put itself together. And so the lower mind comes up with these conclusions, and so it slays the real. And now there's another higher and lower, and that's the higher and lower feeling energies. We could call it the higher and lower heart. But what's the difference between these two? What's the difference between the higher and lower emotional energies?
Well, there's what's called the heart and the head, which is the higher heart. It has its petals in the crown chakra, but other than that, it's the heart of the soul.
Okay, let me clarify this a little bit. The lower, a lot of people call the heart energies when you just talk to kind of rank and file people, is really the solar plexus. And then the higher heart energies is in the heart. Now you have a reflection in the head also, but the Christ energies is in the heart chakra, and it's a higher feeling energy than the solar plexus. But what's the difference between the two?
The solar plexus is the love of desire.
Okay. Yeah, lower desire. What? Why do a lot of people call the solar plexus heart? In other words, it's
They feel the emotions.
the solar plexus, like when you fall in love, the romantic energies is really centered around the solar plexus more than the heart. For most people,
It's the lower astral body.
right? But so what's a basic difference between the two? The lower energies and the higher energies and the feeling nature. Now we're talking about lower and higher mind. There's also lower and higher feeling.
It's the point of focus.
And the focus on the lower is on what?
Well, it's where you focus your attention. Your attention, if it's on the source of the cosmic love, that's the higher love. You focus upon personal love, and it's a focus on the desire body.
Okay, and the basic difference though is the lower
Is the personality?
Personality. The lower energies is on self. So the higher feeling energies is on what?
Well, your spirit and the group and
Right.
connection and
Right, outside of self. Good. Okay, so if the person falls in love and is focusing on the lower aspects of love, he's going to ask, what can this person do for me? I'm in love with this person because this person does ABC for me.
Well, because it makes me feel good.
Right. If he's focused on the higher aspect of love, he will say, he will want to help this person that he's fallen in love with. He will see, he will be like, Paul says, the man is supposed to be like a Christ to his wife and serve her. Okay, so in other words, this is the Christ-like love is service. So the lower aspect of love says, what can you do for me? The higher aspect says, what can I do for you?
Serving self versus serving others.
Right, right. And so the Tibetan talks about higher and lower mind, and then this higher and lower love also is important for us to understand. And then he talks about higher and lower principles. He defines principle a little bit different than I've seen anyone else do it. Let me read his definition. It says, a principle is that which embodies some aspect of truth on which this system of ours is based. It is the seeping through to the consciousness of the man a little of the idea on which the Logos bases all he does. Okay, and he points out that love is very important in this solar system because this solar system is based on the second ray of love. Now, the 7 rays overall, and this solar system is 1 of 7. Now, he's never told us what all the other 6 are, but I would guess Sirius is probably ray 1. It's more advanced than ours. And he talks about our solar system as actually a reincarnation from a previous solar system, and that was on ray 3, and that's intelligence and matter. And during the advance of our first solar system, of which we were probably there in some function, but intelligence and matter evolved. And that's why we have evolution in matter right now, because the intelligence of God organized matter in the first solar system. That's where it concentrated at. And now in this solar system, it's organizing consciousness through the aspect of love. And we're just beginning to understand the principle of love as it unfolds in this solar system. So this solar system will be an example of the unfolding of love. Now, there's 6 other solar systems with the unfolding of the other 6 rays, and we don't know much about them outside of there's a great life that is incarnated and a great logos that's over the 7 solar systems.
Is it possible some of those are duplicate rays or something?
Something what?
Is it possible those other ones are maybe on the same ray, or you think they're all balanced in the 7?
Yeah, there'd be 7 different solar systems representing the 7 different rays. Now, it's possible there might be 2 solar systems as a point representing 1 ray. I don't know, but yeah, we're not given many details about this. And then over and even what the Tibetan calls 7 constellations, or is a great logos, which is called the one about whom naught can be said, which is such a high entity that the masters don't even know much about him. So anyway, he talks about higher and lower principles, and the lower principles is where we learn by pain. In other words, he says, if you steal and then you from someone and then you suffer because you get caught, he says, then you learn from it and you learn the basic principles of like obeying the 10 commandments and this type of thing. He calls these lower principles. And then a higher principle is centered on the intuition and higher thought, and encompasses the love principle. The lower principles, he says, just are like cut and dry things. You do this and this is going to happen to you. The higher principles is where you understand the consciousness behind things and you get a taste of the motivating power of love and consciousness that permeates things, and you begin to understand why things work.
One linking principle may be the law of grace, which is the forgiveness that comes.
Yeah. Yeah.
So love would have to be like the motivating, driving forward principle behind economics, politics, education, religion, not just family life and love of your wife or your partner, but all the aspects that humanity is striving to perfect itself through. So that's how I would the criteria I would use, for example, to pick a political candidate would be observing the degree of undermining or underlying love, if I could find any in his campaign, or education or whatever.
Right. He says both the higher and lower principles are true, but the people that's focused on the lower principles, like, don't see the whole picture. In other words, they just see, if you do this, this is going to happen. And the people with the higher principles can have a higher grasp of things. And the problem is, he says, there's a conflict happens when the person centered on the higher principles is having a discussion with one centered on the lower principles. He says, even though they both see aspects of truth, there's going to be conflict because they won't be able to understand each other. And it reminds me of our political divisions. We have people on both sides of the various political divisions that both of them are seeing aspects of things that are true, but they're disagreeing with each other, and they disagree with each other quite fervently. Let's just take one thing, for instance. A lot of people are into the social programs that we have today, and most people are okay with some social programs, but then there's some that want to go much further on the social programs than others. And so we have a conflict here. And where's the basic conflict? The basic conflict is values, for instance. Let's take, socialized medicine. If we were to switch over to socialized medicine, it would cost a tremendous amount of money, and there would be a tremendous amount of waste. There is already a lot of waste. But some people just say, well, it's the right thing to do, so let's just do it. Okay, well, then another group comes in and says, well, that'd be great, except we can't afford it. We just don't have the money. And the other guy says, well, we got plenty of money. Let's just do it. The money can come from somewhere. And so say both of the people may think it would be a good idea to be able to insure everybody for free, but one of them looks at all the details, looks at the whole picture, and looks at how difficult it would be to accomplish without infringing on free will, without going into too much debt, without bankrupting the nation. And so you have two people that maybe see the desirability of group cooperation, but maybe one of them sees how much all the difficulty is involved, and it's just not just doing it because it feels good. We have to do it in a way that really works and produces a good end result. In other words, we don't want to become like Venezuela, which had all kinds of social programs, but now the people are all fleeing to Brazil and Colombia because they're starving to death. And so
the problem is corruption. The system doesn't work. Communism didn't work because humanity are dishonest in a lot of ways. It's personal interest and greed. This is why these things don't work.
Yeah, but personal interest and greed will always be there. And so you have to develop a system that incorporates human weaknesses into it, or will work with the human weaknesses. And so this is one of the problems, and people don't take into consideration human weaknesses. They just say, well, this sounds really good, so let's do it. And so they don't consider that human weaknesses will create a lot of problems.
Well,
The thing
the
is that
trickle-down theory in politics doesn't work because the money doesn't trickle down. The government gives freedom to the corporations. The corporations hoard the money. It doesn't go down to the workers.
You know? And so we have to ask, well, why do corporations hoard the money? So that's getting into an area here that would take too long to discuss all the details. But the problem is, the point is that two people approaching a solution to something or something desirable that we want. Like, it'd be nice if we could just give free cars and gas to everybody, okay? That would be something that would be nice to be able to do. Or free housing to everybody. There'd be no more homeless. And a lot of people think we could just snap our fingers and make that happen. Well, we need cooperation of millions of people to make good things happen for people. And so we have to figure out the best way to make it happen. The people that are in the feeling energy just feel that we just need to snap our fingers and make it happen. But we need the mind has to play in, and the Tibetan talks here about the importance of mind. He says that he talks about the approach through the heart and the approach through the mind, and he says the student has to give way eventually to the higher mind. The higher mind using logic, pure reason, and he points out that pure knowledge is very closely connected to the heart. But heart without knowledge and mind reaches a dead end. He says mind is a connecting link. He says the higher mind is a connecting link to every life in our solar system. From the lower to the higher, that's the great connector. And he even says this on his introduction. He says, the plane of the mind, the plane whereon the masters can be found. And so when the problem with humanity and many of the disciples and people of good intent is they don't incorporate the mind into what we're trying to accomplish. For instance, what can we do to get the corporations to spend more of their money? Would tax breaks work? Should we use force? So we need to structure something with the mind that will unleash the power of the human soul in the corporations and the businesses and the families and the groups, so that they have the incentive to do the right thing. And people want to do the right thing a lot more than they're given credit for. A lot of people think that, we're all evil and selfish. And a lot of people are selfish because situation kind of forces them into being more selfish than they want to be. And so we need to create situations using mind where everyone feels incentive to do the right thing.
We have to teach the law of karma. If people knew everything that they do as a result and they're responsible for it, then humanity will begin to change.
Yeah, no one would kill anybody if they really understood the law of karma.
Yeah. On what you were just saying, it's kind of like on one side you got one thing, and people think, no, this is a problem. The other side's like, well, no, this won't work because blah, blah, blah. But there's not necessarily a solution there. But like the stuff you talked about with the molecular business and stuff kind of illustrates this principle that, you can have this back and forth here, but the real thing is some new thing presented over here.
Right, right.
And you need something where there's freedom for the actual new thing, you know.
And that's what I try to do with the molecular business. I try to create a solution that's in between the two extremes that we have out there, that maybe both sides can focus on.
And I was going to say earlier, the problem with communism is if it doesn't work because people are too corrupt, and we need it to make things fair because people aren't perfect, then there's no room for it at all. Because if everybody was perfect, we wouldn't need it.
Yeah, if the main reason communism didn't work was because it was forced. You take something that's a good goal and you force people into it, then they're going to work grudgingly. And so they're not going to work for the good of the whole if they feel like they're forced into it. And so that was one of the big problems with Soviet-style communism.
It wasn't communism, it was a dictatorship of the proletariat.
Yeah. Wasn't good communism, let's put it that way. Okay.
I think the battle between practical and ideal is probably older than written history itself. It's probably the oldest problem on the planet.
Yeah, it's we have the big problem between the idealists and the practical people. The idealists don't think about the consequences, don't think about the costs. They just want to go do stuff. And the practical people say, hey, well, wait, how are we going to pay for this? Or how are we going to figure out how to do it without taking away free will? And so we have these mind versus emotion, and we need a blending of mind and emotions, so we work together. Now he talks about the ones that go on the higher principles, and he says this about it. He says he spends and consequently receives. He lives the life of renunciation, and the wealth of the heavens pours in on him. He gives all and is full to completeness. He asks nothing for himself and is the richest man on earth. Then he talks about higher principles still, and the higher principles still are connected to the monad or pure spirit. And he says the lower principles is, the emphasis is on diversity. He says the higher principles, the emphasis is on bringing the many into the few. And the highest principles is bringing the few into the one. And so, we see that played out a lot in our, today, that in our political strivings, we talk about the importance of diversity, but the diversity is focus on diversity is the lower principles. What we need to do is bringing the diverse into the one. And so, for instance, we bring in a lot of immigrants, but when they're brought in, they need to be brought in under one banner. So we need to take the diverse and make them one. So if you have a country where everybody's flying their own flag and everybody's doing their own thing, then you're having a country based on what the Tibetan calls the lower principles. The higher principles is where we do bring in the many, and they are diverse, but we take the diverse and we guide them toward oneness, one people. And that's what made the United States great to begin with. We brought in many people from all over the world, and they all became one country, one people, and it became a great miracle the way it grew and prospered. So that's kind of interesting to think about.
I had a thought on disagreements and people in the lower and higher principles and just disagreeing and seeing eye to eye in the soul. And this might work for some people, but not for others. But if you look at your argument sort of abstractly or symbolically, like you're saying, well, we got to build a school and raise taxes on property. What does that symbolically mean? And if you take it out and look at it symbolically, and you can see it in two ways and kind of plug it into the rest of the situation in a different angle, you might be able to see it from a new point of view. And on that abstract level, you can potentially have more harmony with somebody else when you view it like that, instead of necessarily connected to the ground situation, if that makes sense.
Yeah, good points. DK talks about adding of light and knowledge, the mind to the heart. He says, until the path of knowledge has been added to the path of love, the disciple can never take the major initiations. For these are undergone on the higher levels of the mental plane. Until the path of light is united to the path of life, the great transition from the fourth to the fifth kingdom cannot be taken. Remember, humanity is a fourth kingdom, and the masters, or the kingdom of God, is a fifth kingdom. Certain expansions of consciousness are possible. Initiations, the astral and lower mental planes can be taken. Some of the vision can be seen. The sense of the presence can be felt. The beloved can be reached by love. And bliss and joy of this contact can carry with it its abiding joy. But that clear perception which comes from the experience undergone on the mount of illumination is a different thing to the joy experienced on the mount of blessing. The heart leads in one, and the head leads in the other. In other words, he's saying that the people that are kind of the mystics and centered in the heart, they can have spiritual experiences, they can have joy, they can even have visions and visitations. And we encounter this with religious people all the time. They're having all kinds of visitations and seeing Jesus and different things like this. But he says, to take the higher initiations, you have to open up the higher mind. And the higher mind focuses on pure reason and truth and why things work and the understanding of principles. These are important. The heart alone will only take you so far. And I just had an argument the other day with a guy online who was saying that we need to obliterate the mind, do away with the mind completely. And a lot of this type of thinking that we just got to do away with the mind is really permeating a lot of New Age groups. And the reason they like that is because that means they don't have to think. And to think takes quite a bit of effort. Right, Curtis?
Right on.
We found that out.
You don't like to think.
How many times have we encountered people that didn't want to think?
Most of the people we encountered on the Mormon path, they go with the adage, when the leaders speak, the thinking has been done. So why waste my time? Why reinvent the wheel?
That was quite a quote in the Mormon church that Curtis and I had to deal with, was when the leaders speak, the thinking has been done. So we had a hard time when we were trying to teach the Mormons to get them to think.
That was the product of the Piscean Age. The Piscean Age, when people wanted to be like a school of fish to follow the leader.
Yeah. And that was the age that we had to go through. We learned a lot from it, and now we're ready to move on to something higher. He says, true knowledge is intelligent love. Now, that's an interesting statement by itself. True knowledge is intelligent love. Who would think in that direction? For it is a blending of the intellect and devotion. Unity is sensed in the heart. Its intelligent application to life has to be worked out through knowledge. Says it is of prime value to recognize the tendency of the life purpose and to know whether the head or the heart method is the objective of any specific life. In other words, aspirants spend many lifetimes centered in the heart. And he says that sometimes, you know, we may be centered in the mind, and then you may go through life where you kind of go back and kind of plunge back in the heart again, because of lessons that we need to learn. I had a psychic give me, well, Curtis and I had this psychic give us a past life reading. He might remember it, but I don't know if there's any truth to it, but he told me I was in this particular life I had to relinquish a lot of the power that I had developed in past lives because I was focused too much in the mind and not enough heart. So I had to go back in this for a period of time and kind of stumble around until I kind of appreciate the heart energies more. And so I don't know if there's any truth to that, but I thought it was an interesting statement. But
What do you say to Curtis?
Oh, she said, Curtis and I have been together many different lifetimes. He says, sometimes I was a leader and sometimes he was a leader. And I said, well, when was he the leader? He says, well, during the Crusades, he was a valiant knight. And I just idolized him. I was about 15 years old or so, and I just idolized him. And I wanted him to take me to the Crusades.
Mm-hmm.
And he refused because I was too young, and I insisted. And he finally gave in and took me, and I got killed. And he says, ever since that time, Curtis has felt somewhat protective towards you. And so I turned to Curtis and I says to him, do you feel protective toward me? And Curtis says, well, yeah, I kind of do.
I felt responsible. I still feel responsible in some ways.
So anyway.
Yes. I'm surprised you remembered all that, Joe.
Yeah, I remember it pretty well. Yeah, she said we were initiates back in the Great Pyramid in ancient Egypt.
Probably
And
from Atlantis.
She says, what caused me to lose my powers? And she says, I was a high initiate back then, and Curtis was working on his 5th initiation, and he was in this room, and she said all these waters started coming in, and Curtis had to figure out how to get out before he drowned it, and he screwed up and he just drowned. And
no wonder I don't like water.
She said, I was presiding over the thing, and she says, what I thought at the time was, boy, did he ever, what a loser. You know? That's the way I looked at it. And I looked at it just totally mentally without having any compassion for Curtis. And she says, because of that, I had lost a lot of my powers. And she says, you've gone through a long period of time, and now you're on the verge of getting them back. You know, if you learn to have the compassion that you're supposed to learn. So anyway, that's when Curtis and I left. We thought, well, the gals at least got a heck of imagination, if nothing else.
Maybe the waters were symbolic of lower emotion.
Yeah.
You're supposed to pull me out of them.
Well, I'm sorry, Curtis, if I didn't have any feeling for you drowning there.
Better luck next time.
Well, I think the goal in this life is to find the point of balance between the head and the heart.
Exactly.
That's what I tried to do.
And that's what he points out here. He says we need to find this balance. But we have the actual physical brain, which is actually a great machine. Then we have the lower astral energies and the solar plexus governing selfish desire. And then we move up and we have the higher energies in the heart. And then we have the throat, the creative energies. Then we have the higher energies of the higher mind. And then higher up on the female level is the intuition, which is female polarized. And so we have the stepping stones, male, female, as we step up until we get to the unified point of origin. Okay. He ends here, we'll end this with a quote from an ancient scripture he gives here. And it's pretty well written. He says, "Seek not, O twice blessed one, to attain the spiritual essence before the mind absorbs. Not thus is wisdom sought. Only he who hath the mind in leash, and seeth the world as in a mirror, can safely be trusted with the inner senses. Only he who knoweth the five senses to be illusion, and that naught remaineth save the two head, can be admitted into the secret of the cruciform transposed." It's an interesting statement. He says five senses are illusion, but there's two senses remain that can be trusted. So any idea what the two senses are in addition to the five?
Something like the mind and the soul.
What's that?
Something like the mind and the soul.
Right. I would say the two senses would be the eye of the soul would be in other words, the step up and the higher permanent sense would be to see through the eyes of the soul. And what would be the next sense? What's higher than the soul?
Oh, the monad, your spirit.
Right. To see through the eyes of pure spirit. So probably the two senses, that's my guess anyway, is the two senses that lie ahead are seeing through the eyes of the soul and the spirit.
Well, let me just say, when I got a witness on reincarnation, it had nothing to do with the lower five senses. It had to do with an inner fire that burned within for 3 days that I couldn't conjure up. I could not replicate that on my own. And that I was able to trust completely. And that was what empowered me to actually be excommunicated and smile about it.
Yeah, for the average Mormon, being excommunicated is kind of traumatic because they think, well, if there's one chance in a million I'm wrong, I'm going to reign with the devil and his angels for all eternity. That sounds pretty bad.
Yeah.
Okay, the scripture continues. "The path that is trodden by the server is the path of fire that passes through the heart and leadeth to the head. It is not on the path of pleasure, nor on the path of pain that liberation may be taken, nor that wisdom cometh. It is by transcendence of the two, by the blending of pain with pleasure, that the goal is reached, that goal that lieth ahead, like a point of light seen in the darkness of a winter's night. That point of light may call to mind the tiny candle in some attic rear, but as the path that leadeth to the light is trodden through the blending of the pairs of opposites, that pinpoint, cold and flickering, groweth with steady radiance till the warm light of some blazing lamp cometh to the mind of the wanderer by the way. Pass on, O pilgrim, with steady perseverance. No candle is there, nor earth lamp fed with oil. Ever the radiance groweth till the path ends with a blaze of glory, and the wanderer through the night cometh, the child of the sun, and entereth within the portals of that radiant orb. One thing you got to say about DK, it comes up with pretty profound words that leave you thinking. I mean, whether you understand them or not, you got to admit they really sound good.
You like
Yeah.
to quote him.
I think he would be good at writing legal contracts.
Yeah, he probably was a lawyer in a past life, I'll bet. Okay, any comments or questions before we move on to the meditation?
Curtis, how did that that experience relate to reincarnation that you were talking about?
When I got a witness, it's like two of these senses that we're talking about in the soul. When I got a witness, it wasn't from any of the lower senses. It was from the highest that I was able to comprehend or feel from inside. It was like a fire.
Spoke to your soul, in other words.
Huh?
Spoke.
It was like a fire, and nothing else would have sufficed. The logic was there. It began to make sense, but I needed more.
So
Yeah.
the fire, in a sense, told you or revealed that reincarnation was a thing, or confirmed it, or something.
Yeah, confirmed it. It was like a fire that started in my solar plexus, from the solar plexus to the heart, right here on down, those three centers. It just was inflamed, and it was one of the most amazing sensations I'd ever experienced. And it came through Joe. Joe was my teacher, and he had introduced a concept that was so foreign to the Mormon mind that the Mormon mind can't accept it on its own, not even with pure logic. So it required that extra sense, that extra feeling to make it real. And then it was real. And then there was like no denying it. It didn't matter what the bishop said. Didn't matter what the stake president said. They had lost all power over me because of that higher sensation.
Yeah, I remember Curtis's dilemma when I finally thought he kept asking me, I just kept teaching him different things, and he kept coming up to me and saying, well, what else do you know? I said, well, so I give him something else, and then I thought, well, maybe he's ready for the big one, which is reincarnation for a Mormon. And so I call him over and I told him about it and read him some scriptures that prove it, and used all the logic I could. And the next couple of days, he was just beside himself. He was just thinking, boy, this just upsets the whole apple cart.
It just blew my mind.
And so it was about 3 or 4 days. I don't remember how many days. I think it was about a week. He was just beside himself. And I thought, wow, I don't know if this might be driving him crazy. And then he calls me up and he says, I got a witness.
and the witness was heartburn.
Yeah, ultimate.
So I was glad he got a witness, because I was getting kind of nervous for him. He was really beside himself.
Yeah, did you ever get a witness on it, Joe?
He created a point of tension because he really wanted to know, and he was driven. And so that's what you need to make that spiritual breakthrough, is that point of tension. And he created that point of tension for himself.
Yeah. We need to instill that logic and that mind in people exploring the molecular order. Get them to get a witness on it.
Yeah, it's we need to have that happen. Were you here at the beginning when I talked about this guy that got this witness on me? Yeah, the guy I hadn't heard from for about 6, 7 years. He was really enthused, and he kind of went off the path and become an atheist. And he was looking, just sitting in his room, and all of a sudden this light appeared, and I was in the light.
Oh, when he thought you were appearing to him.
Yeah, and I told him to get back on board. And he says, and he asked me, "Do you remember doing that?" I said, "No."
You're darn right, I did.
Must like to take credit for it, but I said, "Must have been my higher self."
Well, maybe it was you.
Yeah, well, it probably was my higher self.